The Supreme Court of Missouri was created in 1820 with the adoption of the state's first constitution. As members of the state's highest court, Supreme Court of Missouri judges review important and often controversial legal issues that affect the lives of the state's citizens. Originally, Missouri Supreme Court had only 3 judges, Matthias McGurk, John D. Cook, and John Rice Jones. In 1872, the court expanded to 5 judges, and again in 1890 to the current 7 judges. The 20th century saw more cases brought before the judges. In response to the heavier caseload, the court was authorized to appoint 4 commissioners to assist with hearing cases and drafting opinions. Commissioners continued to assist the Supreme Court judges until 1970, when a constitutional amendment brought this practice to an end. For its first 54 years, the court held session in various cities, rotating between St. Louis, St. Charles, Jackson, and Franklin. At various times, the court also sat in Fayette, Bowling Green, Boonville, Palmyra, Potosi, Lexington, Columbia, Hannibal, Cape Girardeau, and St. Joe. The 1875 Constitution provided for a permanent seat for the Supreme Court in Jefferson City. As we will see later in the course, the Missouri Supreme Court has often been at the center of national issues, especially with respect to civil rights and civil liberties. Certainly the most famous ruling to arise from the state Supreme Court was its opinion that Dred Scott remained a slave after having been taken into a free state. A precursor to the Civil War, this ruling was later upheld by the United States Supreme Court. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. I think, unless you have any questions over what we talked about the last time, we are done with the executive branch. We've done the governor, we've done the separate elected office holders, and last time we did the bureaucracy, or the departments and agencies. So I think we've covered that ground. Based on your emails, it seems like we've got everything together. So today, next time, I'd like to move on to the judiciary. And it's complicated. In the past, I've tried to cram this into 50 minutes, and I want to just take our time and get through first the structure of the courts. So we're going to start with the structure of the courts. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, and the circuit courts, give you the qualifications, the terms, and some of the nitty-gritty details. But the thing that I want you to walk away with is if you could picture in your mind a wedding cake. And so we'll draw the wedding cake over here, and we'll probably erase it because in the end, it's going to be one weird looking wedding cake. And hopefully when we do the graphics, we'll be able to get this wedding cake. I know it looks a little bit more like a battleship perhaps than a wedding cake. If you could picture on the top the precious moments bride and groom, which I had on my own wedding cake, that might actually help you remember what we're talking about. Top layer, of course, is going to be the Supreme Court. The middle layer is the Court of Appeals. And the bottom layer in Missouri is the Circuit Court. Now, I'll get ahead of myself just a little bit, but this is not an ordinary wedding cake. If you had a wedding cake, Carol, you're married, you had a wedding cake, okay. It had frosting and filling. How did the filling go? What kind of filling was it? Lemon. Lemon filling is good. Now, most cakes have filling that runs horizontally. This is a weird wedding cake in that the filling is going to go vertically, and that's going to be true for the Court of Appeals, and it's also going to be true for the Circuit Court. The division or the structure of the court system in Missouri is different. It's certainly different than the court structure of the United States, and it's different than other states. So it's important to sort of go through this as slowly and as carefully as possible. So feel free to interrupt at any time because this is something that you probably don't know. The Circuit Court, the lower tier, there are 45 circuits in the state of Missouri. 45 circuits in the state of Missouri. Draw the map of Missouri, divide it 45 times. Those are the 45 circuits. The circuit court itself is divided into 3 divisions. That's why we have the cake divided 3 ways. The 3 divisions are associate division, circuit division, and the municipal division. And if we want to come over here to the wedding cake, we would have the associate division, we would have the circuit division, and the municipal division. I tried to draw this cake to scale, and you'll understand what I mean, and it just doesn't work. So again, picture that wedding cake. The circuit court is divided into 3 divisions. Now, one of those divisions is called the circuit division. It gets confusing, but all 3 are part of that lower tier of the wedding cake. So let's talk about what goes on in the associate division. And basically, the associate division does 3 things: criminal cases, civil cases, and what we would know as small claims court. Now, what kind of criminal and civil cases is what differentiates the associate division from the circuit division. So let's make a note of what we're talking about here. The associate division handles lower level criminal offenses, which we all know as misdemeanors. The civil court cases, now, I'll pause. What's the difference between criminal and civil? Criminal is you being charged by the state with an offense. Civil is when Richard cuts down a tree in his yard, doesn't really pay attention to where it's going to fall, and it lands on Jim's. Jim, what does it land on? It lands on Jim's car. Now, the question here with respect to Jim's car is, how much is it worth? What do you drive, Jim? Okay, this may not be a good example. Jim drives a '68 Impala. How much is that worth? Is it in mint condition? It's not in mint condition. Well, we'll come back to that in just a second. So, a civil case is when Richard sues Jim because Jim sues Richard because Richard cut down a tree and it fell on Jim's car. The question for the associate is the dollar amount. If it is a value of less than $25,000, then the associate division handles this case. So, Jim, is your Impala worth less than $25,000? Okay, then that lawsuit would be handled by the associate division. Jim sues Richard in a civil matter. That's different than the state of Missouri charging you with a misdemeanor criminal offense. All right, now, small claims. Small claims is much the same as civil, but the small claims court is $3,000. If the dollar amount in question is less than $3,000, it goes to small claims court. So really, civil is anywhere between $25,000 and $3,000. But the best way to remember this is less than $25,000 misdemeanor, and you'll see why in just a second. So the associate division is pretty straightforward. Questions? Because you should be able to see what's coming. The circuit division, you could probably figure this out already. The circuit division does criminal cases. The circuit division does civil cases, just like the associate. Now, you tell me, Paul, what kind of criminal cases? Felony criminal cases, those cases that are more serious. That's the difference between criminal cases here and here. Misdemeanors on the associate division, felonies at the circuit division. Civil cases, I think this is going to be incredibly obvious, but Carol, go ahead and say it. More than $25,000. So the dollar amount is more than $25,000. And so if Richard's tree fell onto Jim's house and somehow managed to hit a power line, start a fire, and burn the house to the ground, and the house is worth more than $25,000, then that case would go to the circuit division. Okay? Now, this is where it gets a little bit murkier, because the circuit division does more than just the criminal and civil cases. So let me erase a little bit so I have enough room. And then there's a big caveat. I mean, an enormous caveat coming, so be looking for the caveat. No, that's an ascot. Yeah, okay. The big caveat will come later. The circuit division also does probate. Now, probate is generally estates and wills. A person who dies doesn't have a will. The estate goes through the probate process. Who gets the assets? Now, even with wills, a will go through probate. In many cases, we'll pretend that Carol and Carly are sisters. Mom and dad pass away, leave everything to Carly. Carol, are you happy? Carol is not happy. Carol sues Carly over the will. So this lawsuit between Carol and Carly over the will of their parents would go to probate cases. So that's a pretty common. Yes, Jim, you can avoid probate if Carol and Carly's mom had set up a trust beforehand. It would go through probate and be approved by a judge before their tragic demise. So yes, you can avoid probate if you do everything in a trust beforehand. But if somebody passes away, even with the will, again, even with the will, it can be contested. That would be done through probate. All right, the criminal court, the circuit division also does family and juvenile. Now, I'll be honest with you, I struggled with how to put this one up there. I wanted to put family separate from juvenile, but it's hard. This is almost to the caveat. It's hard to put this. I'm going to put an asterisk here, not this time because it's the most important function, but this is where the most significant change has come probably in the last 10 years. Let's talk a little bit about what goes on in family and juvenile circuit court. If you're in the circuit division in the juvenile side, delinquency, abuse and neglect, emancipation, if you want to become emancipated from your parents, then that would be on the juvenile side. So abuse of a child, emancipation, those sorts of things are on the juvenile side in the circuit division. On the family side would be things like divorce, domestic violence, so restraining orders, that sort of thing, would be on this side. And also custody. Issues of child custody would be handled here. Now, here's the little bit of a wrinkle, just a little bit of a wrinkle. Family juvenile courts are available in a very small number of jurisdictions. A separate court to handle family and juvenile issues is only available in Clay County, which is North Kansas City, Callaway County, which is Fulton, Boone County, which is Columbia, Jackson County, Kansas City, and St. Louis County. So it's the metropolitan areas, if you want to call Fulton a metropolitan area, but Kansas City and St. Louis and Boone County, these are the major metropolitan areas. They are the only circuit division that has a formal subset for family and juvenile. Now keep that in mind. I said formal subset for family and juvenile because we're going to get to the informal here in just a second. So it's important to recognize that the circuit court division does the criminal, does the civil, but they also do probate, also do family and juvenile. Now, yes, I know, Paul, we haven't got to municipal. We'll get back to that. I ran out of board. So we'll get to municipal in just a second. There are additional specialized courts. In most cases, these specialized courts are administered within the circuit division. These specialized courts would be drug courts, teen courts. You know, we talk about a jury of your peers. Before you're 18 or 17 in Missouri and be considered an adult, there is no such thing as a jury of your peers. Well, teen courts have been established in some jurisdictions to give you, in fact, a jury of your peers. So truancy courts have been experimented with within the circuit court division. Most interestingly, probably, mental health courts. I mean, if you think about crime, I was going to say crime in Missouri, but probably crime anywhere, oftentimes there's a connection between crime and mental health. And so some jurisdictions in Missouri have experimented with a specialized court that deals with issues regarding mental health. It is important to recognize that if family juvenile is where the biggest change has been in the last 10 years, it's probably in this area for the next 10 years. What's going to change? Well, I think family and juvenile will probably extend to more than those counties that we listed before, more of the metropolitan areas, more across the state. I think as family and juvenile courts prove their worth, then we'll see more of them. Again, big caveat coming. What's beyond family and juvenile? It's these experiments. Do the drug courts actually work? Do the teen courts work? Is the mental health experiment worth trying someplace else, worth extending? I think that's what you want to look for in the future with respect to the circuit division. Now, we're going to come back to some of this here in just a second, but stay with me. I want to get to municipal because Paul wants to talk about municipal. So let me erase. And we'll leave circuit here, and we'll put municipal here so that we have the three things together. So let's talk about municipal courts. You know, what does the municipal division do? Remember, three divisions, associate, circuit, and municipal. The municipal division is ordinance violation. City ordinances, traffic laws, housing code violations. You know, Springfield has a limit as to how many dogs you can have in the property, that sort of thing. These are municipal ordinances, and they would go to the municipal division of the circuit court. Now, municipalities with population over 400,000 people. Over 400,000 people. Municipalities over 400,000 people have to have a municipal division in their circuit court. So, what does that mean? Come on, you can do it. If you have 400,000, you have to have a municipal division. Yes, Richard, if you don't have 400,000 people, you don't have to have a municipal division. And this is going to be very important because ultimately, how many cities I almost said it, how many cities in Missouri have population over 400,000? And the answer is just two, St. Louis and Kansas City. So St. Louis and Kansas City have to have a municipal division. Now, let's take Richard's comment. Does that mean the others can't? Absolutely not. Other circuit divisions have circuit courts have municipal divisions, but only Kansas City and St. Louis Have to. And we'll come back to that when we talk about the Missouri Plan in just a bit. So, subject matter. What's done at the associate level is different than what's done at the circuit level, is different than what's done at the municipal level. It's the subject matter there. Now, it is worth talking about qualifications and other things in terms of terms, but I want to do the big but here. This is why it's so hard to draw the cake. When it comes down to, if you think about this, most jurisdictions don't have municipal divisions. Most don't have family. In many jurisdictions, the probate is handled at the associate court level. Ultimately, what it comes down to is the wedding cake looks a little bit lopsided because ultimately there are fewer municipal divisions within the circuit court. Much of that work is done by associate court judges. Much of that work is done by associate court. Probate falls to the associate court. Small claims falls to the associate court. Municipal ordinance fall. This is where much of the preliminary, basic, day-to-day law enforcement takes place in the state of Missouri. It has to do with the population and the counties and the spread of population and how many judges are available. It's impossible to say this is how it works in this circuit and this circuit and this circuit and this circuit, because there is a pretty wide variety between the circuits across, within those 45 circuits in the state of Missouri. There's quite a bit of variation. So if you can remember associate circuit municipal and what they actually do, rather than trying to figure out which individual judge does which thing, you'll probably be better off. Okay, let's talk a little bit about terms and qualifications. Terms and qualifications. And I'm still, going back to Paul's point, I'm still just on the circuit court. We'll get to the appeals court and the Supreme Court in just a second. Terms, a circuit judge, a circuit division judge serves 6 years, an associate division serves 4. Jim? I can't answer how long a term is for the municipal because this is not set formally in the Constitution. They are appointed in St. Louis one way, and they are appointed in Kansas City a different way, which we'll talk about next time, but it's not set, so I can't ask. So, is the municipal 8 or 12 or 17? There's no answer, at least for this class. 100, remember, 1 hour, 100 level. We need to get shirts, PLS 103, 1 hour, 100 level. But for the associate, it is set 4 years for the associate division, 6 years for the circuit division. So that's in terms of the terms. So let's talk about the qualifications, though. Circuit division, 30 years old. Associate division, 25 years old. So there's an age difference. It's much like the House and the Senate. There's an argument that you need to be a little older, a little bit more mature, a little bit more experienced, and so on. So it's 30 years for the circuit division, 25 years. You have to be a circuit resident for 1 year. Again, 45 circuits, you have to live in that circuit for 1 year. That is the same. I'm sorry, that is across all circuit divisions. For the associate, they don't have that same requirement. The associate is you have to be a county resident. All of the associate divisions, there's at least one per county. And you have to be a county resident to be an associate division judge. And there is no time limit. I mean, theoretically, it could be a day. It just says you have to be a county resident to be an associate judge. Now, in both cases, you have to be a Missouri resident in terms of, and this is interesting in the Constitution, it's defined by being a Missouri voter, eligible Missouri voter. So for the associate division, you have to be a Missouri voter. For the circuit division, you have to be a Missouri voter for 3 years. The argument is that you have more of a stake in your community, basically, is what that comes down to. Now, for the circuit division, you have to be a United States resident for 10 years. And there is no U.S. residency requirement for the associate. No U.S. residency for the associate. And the last thing, again, trying to distinguish between circuit and associate, is you have to be a lawyer. You have to be licensed by the state of Missouri as an attorney. And I'm running out of board there. If you are a circuit division judge or an associate division judge, you must be licensed, and it would help if I could spell. You have to be a licensed member of the Missouri Bar. Now, municipal division judges, the requirements are different. Missouri resident, so the term is not set, but you must be a Missouri resident, and you have to be licensed as a lawyer in the state of Missouri most of the time. Licensed, comma, but. Well, that was not what I wanted to write. For towns, cities with less than 7,500 people, towns with less than 7,500 people, you can be a municipal judge without being a licensed attorney in the state of Missouri. Now, I'm getting old, but let's go back to Andy Griffith, who was the municipal judge in Mayberry. And the answer was, it was Andy Taylor. And I'm pretty sure that Andy Taylor was not a lawyer. I mean, think about the state of Missouri. Think about the number of small towns, smaller municipalities that are out there. What would be the option if every one of those municipal judges had to be a licensed attorney? There aren't enough licensed attorneys in those small towns to have municipal judges. So the municipal judge does not have to be a licensed attorney in towns with populations less than $7,500. And it's really an issue of geography more than it is anything else. I mean, small town, rural, outstate Missouri is much less likely to have enough lawyers to fulfill the municipal judge ranks if they have a municipal division. So questions about terms, questions about qualifications. Okay, let's move on to the appeals court, or formerly the Court of Appeals. And there are three. The Court of Appeals is divided into three courts. And I think it's time to resurrect our map of Missouri. It looks something like that. The three courts of appeals are Eastern Court of Appeals, Western Court of Appeals, and Southern Court of Appeals. This is a geographic division. If we go back to the associate, the circuit, municipal divisions within the circuit court, although it's not completely successful, the goal is to have the associate judges, the circuit court judges, the municipal judges be specialists in the fields that they're covering: probate, family and juvenile, and so on. Now, as we said, it's not possible to do across the state of Missouri, and much of that falls to the associate judge. But the goal is subject matter specialization. That is not true for the appeals court. An appeals court judge has to be a specialist in everything, or one might say a generalist. Now, let's go with the Eastern Court and let's draw. This is going to be good. It works something like that, where you have the Western Court of Appeals, the Eastern Court of Appeals, and the Southern Court of Appeals. The Eastern Court of Appeals is based in St. Louis in terms of the formal office. So where is that? That would be here. So in St. Louis is the formal office for the Eastern Court, but they also hear cases in Hannibal, up the river a bit, and down to Cape Girardeau. And so they're based in St. Louis. Well, just abbreviate because I'm going to run out of space. But they hear cases, they travel, they hear cases in Hannibal and Cape. The Western, as you might guess, is based in Kansas City. But the geography of the Western District is a little bit different, and it has to do with population. While it's based in Kansas City, which is going to be over here someplace on our map, they also hear cases in, I'll put it in parentheses, in St. Joe, but also in Jefferson City and Columbia, and as far east as Kirksville. And so this Western District really, Kirksville is over here someplace, but the Western District in terms of geography is really substantial. And so there's a lot of land here for Kansas City, St. Joseph, Columbia, Jefferson City, and Kirksville. There's a lot of ground to cover. The Southern District is based in Springfield. Southern District is based right here in Springfield, but they also hear cases across the state in Poplar Bluff. In the, I believe that's Butler County, the old Butler County Courthouse. So the court will, again, move from place to place. So that's basically the geography. What do they do? Well, they hear appeals from the circuit court. So it's called the Court of Appeals so that we'll come back to some exceptions here, a case that is appealed from the associate in Springfield, from an associate within the Southern District goes to the appeals court in Springfield. A case that is appealed from the circuit court in St. Joe goes to Kansas City. A circuit court case that's from Hannibal goes to the Eastern District in St. Louis. And so again, it doesn't matter what subject area, probate, juvenile, family, circuit, associate, civil, criminal, small claims, if there's an appeal, it goes to the regional Court of Appeals, regardless of subject matter. Okay, now, what are the qualifications? Well, we erase. Qualifications for an appeals court judge are essentially the same qualifications as for a Missouri State Supreme Court judge. So let me erase and tell you what those are. To be an appeals court judge, this is, if you're bored and have nothing to do, Article 5, Section 21. To be an appeals court judge, you have to be 30 years old. 30 years old, you have to be a United States citizen for 15 years, a Missouri voter for 9 years, and you have to be licensed in the state of Missouri. So 9 years for voting, 15 years for U.S. citizen, 30 years old. And when we get to the Supreme Court, I'm going to say same thing. The term is 12 years. And we'll talk about the selection process next time, but the Court of Appeals term is 12 years. That one's pretty straightforward. Supreme Court is maybe a little less straightforward, so we'll do it backwards. All right, Supreme Court qualifications. Well, this one, 30 years old, 15 years U.S. citizen, 9 years as a voter, must be a licensed attorney. What is the term? 12 years. So in terms of multiple choice exams, qualifications in terms of the Missouri State Supreme Court and the Appeals Court are exactly the same. Now, there are some differences, okay? There are 7 members on the Supreme Court. And I probably should have said this before. I don't know that it's going to matter. There are 14 judges on the Eastern St. Louis District, 11 judges in the Western Kansas City District, and 7 judges in the Springfield District. There are 12 judges altogether on the Missouri State Supreme Court. Now, I'm sorry, 12 years is your term, 7 members on the court. The jurisdiction of the Supreme Court is different, and I want to identify 3 things. There is original jurisdiction, goes to the Supreme Court first. You know, go directly to jail, do not pass go. Court cases that arise and go immediately to the Supreme Court, not to the circuit courts, not to the appeals court, but directly to. And the best example of that kind of case is a contested election. Issues pertaining to election laws, issues directly pertaining to a contested election, who won, miscounted ballots, that sort of thing. The Bush versus Gore issue, that would go immediately to the state Supreme Court without going through the lower court process. So that's the original jurisdiction. The Supreme Court has appellate jurisdiction from the Court of Appeals. So if you're not satisfied with the decision in your Court of Appeal in Springfield and Kansas City or St. Louis, that can be appealed to the Supreme Court. So the court has appellate jurisdiction from, and I'm going to run out of space, from the Court of Appeals. This one gets an asterisk because it's somewhat unique. You're not supposed to modify unique, but you know, I said it anyway. The Missouri State Supreme Court has what's called direct appellate jurisdiction. And what that means is you can appeal directly from the circuit court up to the Supreme Court and skip the Court of Appeals. You can go directly from this up to the Supreme Court. It's without going through the Court of Appeals. But again, very specific types of cases, and this is allowed, and it's infrequent. Number 1 would be things related to the Missouri Constitution. I'll run out of space, so I'll just say it many times. A case specifically involving the Missouri State Constitution as opposed to Missouri statutes. A case specifically involving the Missouri Constitution, if there's an appeal, it can go directly to the Supreme Court. Cases that involve Missouri revenue laws. So I'm writing behind the podium, so we can't see this, right? Jim, can you? I'm just saying it. Missouri revenue laws. So Missouri Constitution can go directly to the Supreme Court. Missouri revenue laws can go to the Supreme Court. And the third one, which is probably the easiest one to remember, is the death penalty. And the death penalty is going to come from those felony circuit division decisions. If your case results in the death penalty, that case can go immediately to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court has what is known as direct appellate jurisdiction. Skipping the appeals court goes right to the Supreme Court. Questions about that? This is an awful lot of material. This is one weird-looking wedding cake. And again, I wish I could draw it better. Lower tier, the circuit division, circuit courts with the associate circuit municipal divisions. Most of you will never get past this. If you ever see the inside of a Missouri State courtroom, it's going to be here. So in terms of the numbers of cases, the numbers are high here and get smaller, and of course even smaller. But it's a tiered system. First tier, second tier, third tier. And ultimately the Supreme Court is the decider of all things Missouri. And we'll talk about the implications of how you get on the Supreme Court and the appeals court and these other things by talking next time about the Missouri court plan and methods of election or selection of judges. Any questions about any of this? It's a lot of stuff. Maybe you want to save it for email or think about it and ask me next time. Okay, thank you very much.